What does it mean when silence betrays you? I'd spent 30 years chasing threats in the digital shadows, but nothing prepared me for the envelope that arrived, plain and unmarked, with my name in sharp block letters. I'm a retired federal cybersecurity specialist, a woman who traded family dinners for classified briefings, now savoring the quiet of a small house where birdsong drifts through the kitchen window. My daughter, Maribel, hasn't called in over a week. Her last visit, a tense exchange in this same kitchen, her arms crossed, asking for rent money with a voice that carried no warmth. I handed her the check, no questions, watching her leave without meeting my eyes. That's our rhythm now. Requests without connection, silences I don't dare name. Retirement was supposed to be soft, a reward for decades of vigilance, but some stillness weighs heavier than peace. The teaspoon clinks rhythmically in my chipped mug, a sound as steady as my pulse, while sunlight spills across the counter, warming nothing inside me. That Tuesday, the envelope waited on the doormat, no return address, just a local postmark. Inside, a folded notice from an unfamiliar financial institution detailed a trust account in my name, one I never opened. Maribel's name sat there, a cosigner in cold legal print, nestled among terms like disbursements and loan obligations. I sat at the dining table, hands steady from years of parsing classified reports, tracing each line as if it might unravel. My house, my sanctuary after years of renting and moving, held memories in every corner. Maribel's first bike on the porch, her crayons upstairs. Yet something shifted, a crack in the stillness, hinting at a storm I hadn't foreseen. I didn't call her. I didn't call anyone. The late morning sun slid across the floor, and I let it, feeling a chill settle where warmth should have been. This wasn't peace. It was the quiet, before something breaks. I thought of the years I missed her school recitals, buried in encrypted calls, teaching her to keep her distance as I chased threats. She learned too well, I suppose. Her coldness, I told myself, was pressure, not resentment, a daughter navigating a mother who caught cyber attacks but forgot bedtime stories. But the document in my hand wasn't a mistake. People who betray you don't send apologies, they send paperwork. I folded it back, placed it in the envelope, and stood, the chair scraping softly against the wood floor. Outside, a cardinal sang, oblivious to the weight in my chest. I moved to the window, watching the light shift, knowing I'd need to look closer, dig deeper, the way I once traced malware through servers. My training never left me, even if Maribel had. 3 days later, another envelope arrived, thicker, with the same precise lettering. It held a formal notice, legal letterhead, a petition filed by Maribel Stone, alleging misuse of family assets and psychological instability, requesting full conservatorship over my affairs. I read it twice, sitting at the same table, my hands shaking not from fear but from the precision of her plan. This wasn't impulsive. It was rehearsed, deliberate, a strategy woven with care. The attorney's number gleamed at the bottom, a boutique firm known for high-conflict family disputes. I'd heard of them once, in a case where an elderly man lost his estate to a distant son. I didn't cry. That part of me went quiet long ago, but the betrayal cut deeper than any code I'd cracked. I walked through the house, touching light switches, hinges, memories, Maribel's drawings upstairs, her bike's shadow on the porch. The silence grew heavier, suspicion replacing trust. I started a yellow legal pad, jotting dates, account names, anything I could recall. My career taught me to spot patterns, to map intentions behind encrypted noise. Maribel's petition, cloaked in concern, wasn't love, it was a move. I opened a private folder on my desktop, logging every detail, every discrepancy. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the kitchen. Mrs. Redmond across the street watered her lawn, her wave absent for the first time in years. Word travels fast, even when you say nothing. I didn't check social media, didn't answer Maribel's sterile email claiming this wasn't personal, just concern for my well-being. Instead, I sharpened my focus, knowing this was a war I hadn't chosen but wouldn't lose. The cardinal sang again, but it sounded different now. A warning, not a song. The second envelope sat on the dining table, its edges sharp under the lamplight, like a blade left unsheathed. I didn't touch it again after that first read, but its words echoed, Maribel's petition, accusing me of instability, of mismanaging assets I'd spent decades protecting. My hands, steady from years of sifting through classified data, trembled now, not with fear but with the weight of her calculation. This wasn't a rash decision. It was a campaign, signed and sealed with the precision of someone who knew how to wound. I stood, pacing the hardwood floor, the creak of each step a reminder of the home I'd built, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. Maribel's laughter once filled these rooms, her small hands tugging at mine to braid her hair before school. Now those memories felt like artifacts, brittle under the truth of her actions. I moved to the living room, where a photo of us hung above the mantel. Maribel at 10, gap-toothed, me forcing a smile after a late shift. I didn't look at it long. Instead, I pulled out the first envelope, comparing it to the new one. The same block letters, the same local postmark, no return address. The conservatorship notice listed a hearing date 3 weeks away, the attorney's name glaring from a firm that thrived on family fractures. I knew their kind, polished vultures circling vulnerable estates. My estate wasn't vast, but it was mine. The house, a modest savings, a pension earned through sleepless nights tracing digital threats. Maribel's name on that trust account, unasked, unearned, felt like a theft of more than money. I sat at my desk, the glow of the computer screen casting shadows across my hands. My fingers moved instinctively, opening a private folder labeled only with a string of numbers, a habit from my working days. I typed out every detail from the documents, account numbers, loan terms, the trust's existence. My cybersecurity training kicked in, urging me to map the breach, to find the source. Maribel's signature, nestled in legal jargon, wasn't just a betrayal. It was a clue. I recalled her last visit, her eyes avoiding mine as she took the rent check, her voice clipped, saying she was fine, just busy. I'd told myself it was stress, not resentment, but now I wondered what I'd missed in those silences. The house felt smaller, its walls pressing in as I wandered from room to room, touching objects tied to her childhood. A scuffed bike helmet in the garage, a box of her old drawings upstairs, stick figures and misspelled love notes. Each one stung, a reminder of the mother I wasn't, always rushing to secure servers while her recitals passed unnoticed. Had I taught her this distance? Had my absence carved space for this scheme? I pushed the thought away, returning to the legal pad. I wrote dates, cross-referenced bank statements, noted the attorney's firm. The world outside was quiet, but inside, my mind raced, piecing together fragments like a threat assessment. By midnight, the neighborhood slept, but I didn't. Mrs. Redmond's lawn sprinklers hissed across the street, a sound I'd once found comforting. Now, it felt like static interference in my thoughts. I didn't call Maribel, though her number glowed on my phone. Her email, sent hours after the second envelope, sat unread. "This isn't personal, Mom. I just need to make sure you're okay." The words felt hollow, a script written for someone else's story. I didn't respond. Instead, I added her email to my folder, a piece of evidence in a growing file. The silence wasn't peace anymore, it was a battlefield, and I was mapping its edges. I thought of my career, the years spent spotting irregularities in code, tracing phishing campaigns, unraveling ransomware plots. Maribel's petition was no different, a coded attack, masked in concern. I'd been trained to see through facades, to find the intent behind the noise. Her strategy would leave a trail, and I'd find it. I closed the laptop, the screen's light fading, leaving only the hum of the house. Outside, a breeze stirred the trees, but it carried no answers. Only the promise of a fight I hadn't wanted but couldn't avoid. The cardinal's song was gone, replaced by the distant bark of a dog, sharp and restless in the night. The next morning came with a gray light filtering through the curtains, the kind that makes everything feel muted, unresolved. I brewed coffee in the chipped mug, the steam rising like unanswered questions, and spread the documents across the kitchen table in neat rows. Bank statements, tax returns, mortgage records, all the paper trails I'd filed away thinking they'd only matter to auditors. Now they were my lifeline. Each one tapped like it might whisper a secret. My house had been refinanced. That much jumped out first. A transaction filed 2 months ago under a shell company called Westridge Civic Group. The authorization form bore my name, but the signature wasn't mine, a near-perfect imitation, looping the L's and curving the E's just as I do, close enough to pass a casual glance but not the scrutiny of someone who'd spent decades spotting forgeries in federal clearances. I stared at it for a long time, the pen strokes mocking me, evidence of practice, of intent. Whoever did this knew my hand, had studied it, perhaps from old checks or documents I'd left unguarded. I checked the state's public business registry on my laptop, fingers flying across the keys, the screen's glow reflecting in my eyes. Westridge Civic Group had no physical office, no website, just a P.O. box in Durham and 2 listed executives, one anonymous, the other buried under a slightly altered name, M. Hayes. Hayes, a last name I didn't recognize, but it tugged at something, a thread I couldn't yet pull. Maribel's involvement hovered like a shadow, her name not directly there, but close enough to feel the connection. The kitchen clock ticked softly, marking time as I cross-referenced the refinance details with my own records. The loan amount was substantial, funneled through accounts I hadn't touched, disbursements listed in vague terms that screamed evasion. My career had taught me to see these patterns: shell companies as fronts, forged signatures as entry points in larger breaches. I printed the registry page, added it to my growing folder, the printer's hum a steady companion in the quiet house. Outside, a neighbor's car pulled away, the engine fading into the distance, leaving me alone with the weight of discovery. Maribel had been here, in this kitchen, just weeks before the refinance date. Her visit abrupt, her eyes darting as she asked for that rent check. Coincidence? I doubted it now. I dug deeper, pulling up old emails, scanning for any mention of Hayes or Westridge. Nothing surfaced, but the absence felt deliberate, a clean wipe like a hacker covering tracks. I recalled teaching Maribel about online safety as a teen, unique passwords, suspicious links, but never how to wield those tools against family. Irony bit hard, a sting in my chest as I noted the dates. The shell company registered 3 months ago, around the time her calls grew sparse. I walked to the window, mug in hand, watching leaves stir in the breeze, their rustle like whispers of warning. The cardinal returned, perching on the feeder, its red plumage vivid against the dull sky, but even that felt out of place, a splash of color in a grayscale world. By afternoon, I'd mapped more irregularities, small withdrawals from joint accounts we'd kept for emergencies, transfers to unnamed recipients. The trust account from the first envelope linked here, co-signed by Maribel, funds siphoned subtly. I didn't rage. Instead, I methodically logged each anomaly in my spreadsheet, columns for dates, amounts, discrepancies. My hands didn't shake anymore. Purpose steadied them. The same focus that once dismantled state-sponsored attacks now turned inward. Maribel's petition for conservatorship loomed, her accusations of my instability a clever smokescreen for her theft. Psychological fragility, she'd claimed, but this was her strategy, projecting her chaos onto me. I paused, rubbing my eyes, the table a mosaic of papers under the overhead light. A man at the grocery store yesterday, an old peripheral colleague, had averted his gaze in the aisle. Word spreading, suspicion taking root. I didn't care. Isolation was familiar, a cloak I'd worn through classified ops. But Maribel's betrayal cut differently, personal, a breach in the one firewall I'd thought secure. Family. Hayes, could it be a partner, an accomplice? The name echoed, and I jotted it down, a lid to chase. The sun dipped, lengthening shadows across the floor, mirroring the doubts lengthening in my mind. I folded the forged signature page carefully, slipping it into the envelope, knowing this was just the start. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It pulsed with questions, demanding answers I would find, no matter the cost. That evening, the house wrapped around me like a familiar cage, its walls echoing with the hum of the refrigerator and the distant tick of the clock. I couldn't let the forged signature sit unchallenged. It was a loose thread in a web I needed to unravel. I called in a favor, dialing Lenny Reed, an old colleague from the early days of cyber defense rotations. We'd spent nights intercepting domestic phishing campaigns and mapping state-sponsored ransomware, our bond forged in caffeine and code. He picked up on the first ring, his voice gravelly but warm. No questions asked when I said I needed a quiet trace. Non-reportable, just a map. I sent him what I had, scans of the documents, the shell company details, the refinance form. Within a day, his email arrived, encrypted as always, with access logs, IP paths, and metadata attached. What it revealed hit harder than the initial envelopes, unraveling a scheme far worse than simple forgery. Multiple grant applications had been submitted under my name. Federal programs for veteran relief, housing assistance, even a post-service transition fund for wounded officers. each one tied to the same digital fingerprint, routed through a VPN, but sloppily enough that Lenny could ping the origin. It led straight to Maribel's apartment, timestamps aligning with nights I'd assumed she was working late or sleeping. She hadn't just moved money, she'd impersonated me wholesale, using my military ID number, uploading copies of my discharge papers, documents I'd never shared, assuming they were locked behind encryption layers. How had she accessed them? A breach in some database, or perhaps she'd gleaned enough from casual conversations over the years. The sting wasn't the lies, but the ease of it all, as if my life's safeguards were paper-thin against her determination. I printed everything, screenshots of the metadata, timestamps, reports, and spread them across the table, cross-referencing with my spreadsheet. The connections lit up like a network map. Westridge Civic Group as the hub, funds funneled from the grants to the refinance loan, then dispersed to accounts under M. Hayes. Hayes, who was he? Lenny's trace hinted at a connection, an IP overlap with Maribel's devices, suggesting collaboration. I recalled a vague mention from her last year, a friend helping with finances, but I dismissed it as adult independence. Now, it felt like a planted seed, growing into this betrayal. The house lights flickered slightly as a storm brewed outside, rain pattering against the windows, mirroring the turmoil inside me. I added the new data to my folder, my hands methodical, each page a brick in the wall I was building against her. My career had been about patterns, spotting anomalies in data streams, predicting attacks before they landed. Maribel's moves followed a similar logic. Start small with the trust account, escalate to grants, cloak it all in a conservatorship to seize control. But sloppiness showed in the VPN traces, the unchanged IP on some uploads. She'd learned fragments from me, password hygiene, link caution, but not the full art of evasion. Irony twisted in my gut. I'd taught her to avoid threats, never imagining she'd become one. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof, a rhythm that urged me forward. By nightfall, I'd logged it all into the digital spreadsheet, saving copies to 2 encrypted flash drives. One went into a safety deposit box downtown the next morning, the drive to the bank a blur of wet streets and honking cars. The other I placed in the old fireproof safe bolted to my closet floor. Before locking it, I added a handwritten letter, just a few lines. If anything happens to me, this is not paranoia. This is proof. Read everything. I folded it carefully, placed it atop the drive, and spun the dial, my hand lingering on the cold steel. The safe's click echoed, a finality that grounded me. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving puddles reflecting streetlights, but inside, the clarity sharpened my resolve. I stood at the window, watching shadows dance across the yard, thinking of Maribel's childhood warnings I'd given. Don't click unknown links, vary your passwords. She'd nodded then, eyes wide, but somewhere, those lessons twisted. Had my absences fueled this? The missed recitals, the late nights? Regret flickered, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about guilt anymore. It was survival. The neighborhood quieted, Mrs. Redmond's lights off across the street, her earlier avoidance a distant ache. I didn't sleep much that night, the bed too empty, the silence too loud with revelations. But dawn brought purpose, the first light creeping in, illuminating the path ahead. Maribel's trail was clear now, digital breadcrumbs leading to her door, and I wouldn't stop until I'd followed them all. With the digital trails laid bare, the house felt charged, like a command center humming before an op. I couldn't leave the evidence vulnerable. My training screamed for redundancy, for safeguards against erasure. I spent the morning compiling it all. Screenshots of metadata, IP logs from Lenny, cross-reference spreadsheets tying the grants to the shell company. Each piece slotted into place, a mosaic of betrayal that painted Maribel not as a wayward child, but as a calculated architect. The printer whirred steadily, pages stacking like accusations, the ink's faint scent mixing with the coffee I'd let go cold. Outside, the post-storm air hung heavy, puddles mirroring a sky still bruised with clouds. But inside, my focus sharpened, a blade honed by necessity. I encrypted the files first, using algorithms I'd once deployed in federal systems, layers of protection that would take more than amateur hacking to crack. 2 flash drives, identical twins of data, one destined for the safety deposit box I'd already visited, the other for the safe in my closet. But before sealing them, I sat at the desk, pen in hand, the legal pad's yellow hue stark under the lamp. The letter came out in careful script. No flourishes, just truth. If anything happens to me, this is not paranoia. This is proof. Read everything. I detailed the basics, the fraud, the forgeries, the federal implications, enough to guide anyone who found it. Folding it, I placed it atop the drive in the safe, the metal door closing with a thud that echoed through the empty room. My fingers lingered on the dial, spinning it locked, the cold steel a reminder of finality, of choices that couldn't be undone. I stepped back, the closet's dim light casting my shadow long across the floorboards. Irony twisted in my thoughts. All those years teaching Maribel online safety, unique passwords, phishing awareness, the dangers of clicking blindly. She'd listened, wide-eyed at 12, practicing on mock emails I'd set up as games. "Mom, you're like a spy," she'd said once, giggling as we role-played spotting scams. Now, those lessons had boomeranged, wielded against me with a precision that spoke of twisted application. Had she seen my absences as opportunities, my lectures as blueprints for exploitation? The thought ached, a deep bruise where maternal hope had been. I wandered to the kitchen, pouring fresh tea, the steam curling like unresolved regrets, the mug's warmth seeping into my palms but not my core. Preparation for confrontation loomed, not with drama, but quiet resolve. I knew Maribel wouldn't confess easily. Her petition showed a mind geared for denial, for flipping narratives. I rehearsed in my head, words measured like code lines, no emotion to cloud the facts. The hearing date ticked closer. 3 weeks now shaved to 2, but I wouldn't wait passively. I added more to the folder. Old photos scanned, proof of our shared history, countering her claims of my volatility with timelines of stability. A neighbor's dog barked outside, sharp and insistent, pulling me to the window. Mrs. Lambert walked by, her gaze sliding away as if I were a ghost. Rumors must be circulating, painting me as the unstable one. It didn't matter. Isolation was my ally now, a space to fortify without distraction. By evening, the safeguards felt complete, but doubt crept in like dusk shadows lengthening across the yard. What if she'd anticipated this? Planted decoys in her digital wake? I double-checked Lenny's traces, the VPN slips glaring in hindsight. Sloppy for someone who'd learned from me, or perhaps intentional, a taunt. Regret surfaced again for the recitals missed, the bedtime stories skipped, but I tamped it down. This wasn't about atonement. It was justice, cold and necessary. I made notes on potential questions for her attorney, the boutique firm's reputation for high conflict resolutions, a warning of their tactics. The wind picked up, rattling the panes, carrying the scent of rain anew, but I stood firm, the evidence my anchor. Sleep evaded me that night, the bed a vast emptiness where memories replayed. Maribel's small hand in mine crossing streets, her drawings on the fridge fading with time. Had any of it been real or just prelude to this fracture? Dawn broke gray, the cardinal's song tentative through the window, urging action. I prepared a meal plan in my mind, nostalgic dishes to lure her here, a neutral ground for unveiling the proof. Salmon, carrots, rice, her childhood favorites, linen napkins she'd chosen at 12, their faint lemon thyme scent a bridge to what was lost. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore, it was strategic, a canvas for the confrontation ahead. I locked the safe once more, the click resolute, and turned to face whatever storm she brought next. I made dinner the way she used to like it, pulling out recipes I'd tucked away like forgotten promises. Pan-seared salmon, its skin crisping in the hot pan with a sizzle that filled the kitchen. Roasted carrots, glazed with honey, their sweetness cutting through the tension I could already feel building, and jasmine rice steaming softly in the pot. I set the table with those linen napkins she'd picked from a discount bin at 12, proud of her eye for color, blues and greens that matched nothing but her enthusiasm. They still carried a faint scent of lemon detergent and thyme, a ghost of laundry days long past. The house smelled warm, inviting, but I knew it was a facade, a stage for what had to come. Outside, the evening light faded, casting the yard in soft grays, the cardinal silent now, as if sensing the storm indoors. Maribel arrived late, her knock sharp against the door, dressed in neutral tones that made her look older, colder, like a stranger assessing a listing. She gave the room a once-over, eyes lingering on the table, the food perhaps calculating its worth rather than its warmth. We exchanged short pleasantries as I served. "How's work?" "Fine. Traffic bad always." Her voice flat, devoid of the lilt it once held. She barely touched her plate, fork pushing carrots around like unwanted memories. I waited until we'd finished, the clink of utensils dying down, before placing a single printed page on the table between us. The mortgage refinance form, my name forged in that practiced hand. "Recognize this?" I asked, keeping my voice even, no accusation sharpening the edges yet. She didn't flinch, just glanced down, her lips twitching in what wasn't quite a smile. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossing like a barrier. "You always were so dramatic," she said, her tone laced with dismissal. "It's a house, Mom. You live in it, don't you?" "That's not the question," I replied, my gaze steady, refusing to let her deflect. She rolled her eyes, a gesture so familiar from her teen years it almost hurt. "You were always too busy saving the world to be a mother. Now you're acting shocked that you missed what's been happening under your own roof." Her words landed like a slap, not loud but deep, echoing the regrets I'd buried, recitals unattended, birthdays marked with rushed calls from secure lines. Still, I held steady, the evidence between us a silent witness. "Was any of it real?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above the hum of the refrigerator. "The nights we read together, your drawings on the fridge, the way you used to hold my hand when we crossed the street, was any of it real?" She didn't answer, her eyes flicking away, gathering her bag with deliberate slowness. She stood, looking past me toward the hallway, like the exit was a lifeline she couldn't reach fast enough. "This isn't personal," she muttered, slinging the strap over her shoulder. "You just made it impossible to do things the easy way." Then she left, the door clicking softly behind her, a sound too gentle for the rupture it sealed. The silence she left was brutal, thick and unyielding, wrapping around me like fog. I sat there long after the food had gone cold, staring at the empty chair where she'd been, the napkin folded neatly as if she'd never touched it. I didn't rage, didn't break anything, just let it all rise, uninvited from some place I thought had long gone dry. The tears came slow and steady, not from anger but from grief, a quiet mourning for the child I no longer recognized, for the years I'd traded away, thinking duty outweighed presence. Sobs shook me, soft at first, then deeper, echoing in the empty kitchen, the salmon's aroma turning stale in the air. Memories flooded in, her first words, scribbled cards on Mother's Day, the way she'd curl against me during thunderstorms. Had resentment festered there, unspoken, turning love to leverage? When the sobs passed, leaving my face damp and my chest hollow, I knew what I had to do next. I cleared the table methodically, plates clinking in the sink, the routine grounding me. The evidence folder waited upstairs, its contents a roadmap to justice, not vengeance. I'd file the affidavit soon, turn the digital trails over to the authorities, let the system I'd served unravel her web. Outside, night had fallen fully, stars pricking the sky like distant codes, undeciphered. I stood at the window, tea in hand going cold again, the yard's shadows long and unmoving. Maribel's car was gone, taillights vanished down the street, but her words lingered, a virus in my thoughts. This wasn't the end, just a pivot, from mother to whistleblower, from silence to statement. The house settled around me, its creaks familiar, and for the first time, the quiet felt like an ally, not an enemy. I wore black, not for mourning or theatrics, just black. Clean lines, pressed fabric, shoes I hadn't worn since a funeral 3 years ago, their soles echoing softly on the sidewalk as I approached the courthouse. The entrance loomed, stone steps worn by countless feet seeking justice or mercy, and I walked through alone, no one meeting my eyes in the lobby. I caught sight of Mrs. Lambert near the security checkpoint, her Christmas gingerbread a fond memory, but today she looked past me like a stranger, her gaze sliding away as if I carried contagion. Maribel stood outside the doors, flanked by her attorney and a young man with a camera around his neck, smiling, laughing even, as if this were a social gathering rather than a severance. Her hair curled perfectly, her coat expensive, her voice carrying that false warmth she wore like a shield. The lawyer whispered something, and she nodded, her eyes flicking to me as I passed without slowing. Inside, the courtroom smelled of paper and dust and waiting, the wooden benches hard under my weight as I took a seat near the front. The judge entered with typical formality, his robe swishing, gavel tapping order into the room. Everything that followed felt surreal, a scripted drama where I was both actor and audience. Maribel's attorney was polished, pointed, calling me controlling, emotionally volatile, paranoid, a woman unraveling after a respected career. He cited our distance as proof of my instability, read text messages out of context, played voicemail clips cut short of explanation, building a portrait of fragility from fragments. Maribel played her part well, looking down at the right moments, dabbing her eyes without smudging her eyeliner, telling the court she feared for my safety, that this conservatorship was an act of love to protect me from myself. I said nothing, letting it all land, word after word, lie after lie, my hands folded in my lap, steady as classified briefings. They distorted memories, twisted absences into accusations. But I wasn't here to argue. I was here to end it. When the judge asked if I wished to respond, I stood, my voice calm but deliberate. "Your Honor," I said, "before any ruling is made, I request this be read." I stepped forward and placed a single page on the bench. One page, no speech, no emotion, just the affidavit I'd filed 3 days earlier with the Department of Justice, detailing the forgeries, the stolen identities, the laundered veteran grants. I stepped back, folding my hands again, watching his expression shift from routine to recognition. The judge adjusted his glasses, took the paper, and began to read, his eyes pausing at the second paragraph, brow lowering. By the third, he stopped reading aloud, scanning the rest in silence. Lips tight, gaze hardening. I could hear the shift in the room, the quiet edge of breath held, postures tightening, confidence faltering, like a system detecting intrusion. He placed the page down carefully, then looked toward the bailiff. "Seal the room. No one leaves. Call the U.S. Marshal's office." Confusion rippled through, the bailiff hesitating before a firm nod confirmed it. Doors closed with a solid click, locks sliding into place, the air thickening with unspoken questions. Maribel straightened in her seat, alarm flashing across her face like a glitch in code. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering fast and low, but she turned toward me, searching for reassurance or a loophole. I gave her nothing, my expression as blank as a secured server. The agents entered quietly, deliberately. 3 in plain jackets, their presence commanding without badges flashed. One approached the judge, murmuring low, another headed to the plaintiff's table. "What is this?" Maribel asked, her voice cracking. "This is insane." The agent ignored her, pulling a warrant from his pocket and placing it down. Maribel Stahn, "You're being taken into custody under federal charges of financial fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized misuse of federal military aid systems." Her mouth opened, soundless, as her lawyer interjected, but another agent stepped between them. That's when the name surfaced, Evan Hayes, and a man in the gallery, seated 2 rows back, stood abruptly. I hadn't noticed him enter, his face unfamiliar but fitting the traces Lenny had uncovered, the accomplice behind M. Hayes. He didn't look at Maribel as agents surrounded him, reading rights, cuffing wrists with efficient clicks. Everything moved quickly after. The court clerk gathering documents, the judge signing a sealed order, agents disappearing down the corridor with both in custody. I stayed seated, watching without blinking, they, hands still folded, while the lies unraveled like thread in flame. The judge looked down at me once the room calmed, his eyes holding no pity, just a quiet recognition. "You've done a difficult thing," he said softly, "and the right thing." I nodded once in return, the weight in my chest easing slightly, like a decrypted file finally opening. As he instructed me to reconvene for procedural matters, I stood, the room feeling smaller, not from defeat, but from release. The burden set down after carrying it alone. Whispers followed me out, but I didn't glance back, the hallway's fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a mundane soundtrack to the unraveling. I walked home under a sky washed gray, the kind that follows a storm, neither bright enough to comfort, nor dark enough to match the hollow in my chest. The key turned smoothly in the lock, the door creaking open to a house that felt both mine and foreign, its silence settling around me like a coat I couldn't shrug off. By nightfall, the news broke. A headline flashing across my phone: "Veteran turns in daughter for fraud sparks federal arrests in courtroom standoff." Some called me courageous, others cold, their words skimming the surface of a story they'd never lived. I read only the first lines before setting the phone face down, the screen's glow fading against the kitchen counter. Neighbors passed by the next morning, their steps slower, some staring too long, others looking away entirely. Mrs. Redmond's sprinklers hissed across the street, but her wave never came, the absence louder than any gossip. I didn't answer calls, didn't check social media. The idea of explaining myself felt absurd. They hadn't seen the envelopes, hadn't felt the weight of Maribel's words at that dinner, her dismissal slicing deeper than any accusation. Instead, I made tea, let it go cold, and drove to the storage unit I hadn't opened in years, a relic of my working days, filled with dust and forgotten files. The folder was there, locked in a steel cabinet behind crates, exactly where I'd left it. I opened it without hesitation, sifting through evidence logs and affidavit copies until I found it. A crayon drawing on printer paper, me with wild red hair and a big smile, holding hands with a smaller figure labeled me. Above it, in Maribel's crooked 7-year-old script, "I love you, Mom." I stared at it, the colors faded but vivid in memory, and didn't cry. Grief had already passed through me, leaving only a quiet ache, like a bruise pressed too often. The money didn't matter the way it once might have. A portion of the recovered assets went to a nonprofit for defrauded veterans. No press, no ceremony, just a quiet transfer and a handwritten note to the director, for those who didn't see it coming. Weeks later, I started volunteering. Mornings in a shared office teaching older veterans to spot phishing emails, recognize loan scams, guard their identities. Some listened closely, jotting notes. Others laughed it off, but a few carried the wary eyes of those who'd been burned before. I shared just enough of my story, not the courtroom, not Maribel, but enough to let them know I'd walked their path. It wasn't redemption, just purpose, a way to stitch meaning into the frayed edges of loss. Nights, I sometimes walked past the courthouse, its stone columns stark against the streetlights. People assumed I avoided it, that the memory stung too much, but they were wrong. I didn't hate that place, I respected it. It was where I reclaimed my name, my record, my voice, where truth stood quiet but undeniable, needing no shout to be heard. I never lingered, just walked slow and steady, the wind moving through the trees with a rustle that felt like release, not warning. Back home, I'd sit with a mug, the steam curling upward, and think of Maribel. Not the woman in the courtroom, but the girl who'd clutched my hand crossing streets, who'd drawn that picture with such care. That girl was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, but the memory lingered, a tether I couldn't cut. The world moved on, as it does, headlines fading, neighbors' glances softening, though never fully returning to warmth. I didn't expect them to. Truth doesn't need approval, just someone to stand for it, even when it costs everything. Family, reputation, the illusion of peace. Some saw me as heartless, others brave, but they didn't know the silence that hardened between us, the moment I chose justice over forgiveness. I fought not for hate, but because someone had to remember what was true. Maybe I'll always be the villain in Maribel's story, or someone else's, but that's fine. Truth doesn't beg to be liked, it waits, gathers weight, and endures. As weeks turned to months, the sharpness of that day dulled, blending into the rhythm of quieter routines. I'd wake to the soft chirp of birds outside, their songs weaving through the open kitchen window, a reminder that life persists even after storms. The house, once heavy with betrayal, became a haven again, its creaks and shadows familiar companions. I'd sit at the table, tracing the grain of the wood, thinking of Maribel, not with anger, but with a gentle sorrow, like a tide receding. Volunteering filled my days, the veterans' faces, lined with caution or gratitude, mirroring my own unspoken scars. I taught them to protect what was theirs, to see the signs I'd missed, and in their nods, I found a quiet absolution. The drawing stayed in its folder, untouched but unforgotten, a relic of a love that once felt boundless. Nights brought walks under star-pricked skies, the courthouse a distant silhouette, its weight no longer mine to carry. Truth had done its work, not loudly, but with the steady force of time, leaving me lighter, unburdened. I was no hero, no villain, just a woman who'd stood for what was right, letting the rest fall away like leaves in a soft autumn breeze.